Here's a question for you. Do you think that we should have to pay money because of this country's role in the slave trade hundreds of years ago? One respected judge thinks so. And not only that, Patrick Robinson says that we should pay more than £18.8 trillion. I mean, look, even people, surely even people who think we should be paying money for reparations can't seriously think that it should be £18.8 trillion. Members of the royal family, including the Prince and Princess of Wales, were met with protests demanding reparations when they visited the Caribbean last year. One area that I will say that this judge who works at the United Nations is right is that calls for reparations are not going away. Calls for reparations are getting louder. Calls for some kind of historic compensation, they are getting louder, OK? Whether or not we should do that, someone emailed in earlier on, actually, to tell me that the calls to tell them to swivel, they didn't put it quite as nicely as that, are also getting louder, and that's certainly the camp that I am in. But royal broadcaster and commentator Rafe Heydel-Mankoo joins me now. Rafe, thank you very, very much. Lovely background there, Rafe. Fantastic. Well, what do you think about this? £18 trillion for reparation. You're laughing. Go on, why?
Well, it's absolutely absurd, isn't it? I mean, it amounts to actually the entire globe's GDP just being asked to be paid over here. We have to say, all right, this chap is a judge at the ICJ, but this is not an actual ruling of the ICJ. He's not speaking or making a statement on behalf of the ICJ or in that capacity. This man is an activist. He's from the Caribbean, and he has been a leading activist for reparations for Jamaica and elsewhere for a long, long time. So this man is not making a politically neutral statement when he says all of this. And it also, we have to ask questions, since when do we pay for the sins of our forebears, for example? There were only 3,000 slave owners in Britain. The vast majority of people in this country were living lives of abject poverty and hardship akin to serfdom. And you sort of have to question why British taxpayers who descend from those poor peasants and hardworking industrial people should be paying reparations when they have no part to play in slavery. Also, we now have 16% of this country were foreign-born. Why should people born in, Afghanistan or India have to pay reparations to people in Jamaica? What about the descendants?
Yeah, just on that, Rafe, because I think that's a really interesting point. And as our viewers will have been able to see, and our listeners will soon find out, actor, filmmaker and writer Femi Nylander joins us now. Femi, thank you very much. It's on that point that I want to ask about the practicalities of how this would work. Let's just assume that we do it, right? Let's just assume that Britain does it. Well, whatever percentage Rafe said there of our population currently residing in Britain, it was not British-born. You'd also have a load of people who will be first and second generation, quite possibly from countries where they're saying that we owe reparations to. So who is paying this, then?
So, I mean, firstly, I'm British-born, but I am descendant of Nigerians. And if you compare how much wealth I have or how much income I have to people who live in Nigeria today, I make a significant, and by significant, I mean tens or hundreds, or more than hundreds, more than them. Because of the fact that I live in the UK, because the UK is the 6th richest country in the world, previously the 5th before Brexit. So the fact that the UK is wealthy benefits the people living in the UK now. And also, no one is saying that I, as a Nigerian, should personally put money in my pocket and give it in terms of reparations to a Caribbean. People are saying that the UK as an entity, which became rich by leading the slave trade and which has passed that wealth on to subsequent generations, because we all know about inheritance and we all know that wealth is inherited. I'm sure you're going to leave money to your children when you die. That some of that wealth should be returned, because the Caribbean today is largely poor. And of course, Africa itself, when a large portion of your workforce age, young, youthful population is stolen and taken away, your economy obviously takes a hit. If a large proportion of young men in the United Kingdom was stolen from the country now, it would affect the future of the United Kingdom.
All right, Rafe, come back to that then.
Well, firstly, I would say, if as a Nigerian, if Britain is to pay reparations, then I think Femi as a Nigerian and other Nigerians should also pay reparations, because we have to remember it was from the west coast of Africa, from states like Benin and Nigeria today, that slaves were enslaved by other Africans. You know, there were as many slaves kept in bondage and slavery by Africans as were transported over the Atlantic. No white men were going inland and capturing slaves. They were purchasing slaves sold to them by the African chiefs of Western Africa. So if Britain is being asked to pay for slavery, then obviously people in Nigeria should also be paying for slavery. Also, you know, Femi has just said that the Caribbean is very poor. Actually, the Caribbean are middle-income countries, far wealthier than the West African countries from where the slaves first came. You know, the GDP per head in Benin, for example, is approximately $1,500 a year. You go to somewhere like Barbados, it's $14,000 a year. Okay. You know, Portugal, the biggest slave trader of all, is a poor country today. Slavery didn't benefit these European powers, as is often said. In this country, in the UK, slavery only contributed to about 3% of capital formation. The Caribbean states, it's impossible to tell me why the Caribbean states should be receiving any reparations money. You might make an argument for West Africa, but the Caribbean states have not been neglected or badly treated today. Okay. Sure, the slaves themselves had terrible lives, but the descendants of slaves living today in the Caribbean have a far better quality of life and a far longer life expectancy.
OK, all right, I'll let Femi come back. So, Femi, how do you respond to that claim there that Africans and descendants of Africans should also be paying reparations for the other Africans that they enslaved?
I mean, I don't know how much Rafe knows about Africa, but of course I think that within Nigeria, there's conversations to be had about particular traditional leaders, etc., and parts of the country that have wealth. I mean, any country where one part has exploited another part, there should be some kind of retributory justice going on. And I wouldn't be opposed to certain people who have enriched themselves within Africa off these kind of these actions having to pay something. I'm not. No one's saying that that's not the thing. The main beneficiary of the slave trade, of course, was can I just finish? The main beneficiary of the slave trade was, of course, the UK and European countries. Also, when you look at the actual economics of countries like the Caribbean, yes, countries in the Caribbean tend to be wealthier than countries in Africa. However, when you talk about $14,000, we have to remember this is one purchase parity adjusted, which means when you talk about $14,000, that isn't $14,000. That's what you could buy. How much money you'd need in the local currency to be able to buy $14,000 worth of bread or of this or of the other. So in terms of actual currency exchange, that isn't $14,000. And also, when you look at Barbados, for example, a lot of the wealth of Barbados is very, very, very concentrated in some of the tax exiles and very wealthy people who have emigrated to Barbados to benefit from the tax scheme there. The actual native population of Barbados are relatively poor compared to Western countries, including Portugal.
All right, Rafe, come on.
Yeah, well, every single country in the Caribbean has a higher GDP than West African nations. Let's use another measure. Every former British colony in the Caribbean has a higher quality of life and ranked higher on the UN's Human Development Index than all of the rest of South America, all of the Spanish and Portuguese colonies. And of course, Femi hasn't addressed life expectancy. Life expectancy is about 15 years higher in the Caribbean compared to West Africa, a direct benefit there. Look, if we were having this discussion about reparations in 1807 or 1833, when we led the world in abolishing slavery, of course I would be in favor of it, because the people then were alive. But as Bayard Rustin, the great socialist in America, said, and this was a man who was given the Presidential Medal of Freedom posthumously by Barack Obama, he said, if my great-grandfather picked cotton for 50 years, he may deserve some reparations, but I didn't pick cotton, and nobody owes me anything.
OK, Femi, look, just final word to you on this. With respect, do you think that some people, this would be a controversial view, which is why I want your take on it, do you think that some people will be right in saying that people need to get over things of the past and instead of maybe blaming things for where their own lives are at now, maybe just, you know, try to improve their own lives now?
No, I mean, I think the clearest example that people today might still be poor because of what happened to their ancestors is the fact, as Rafe just mentioned, in 1807, reparations weren't paid, but they were paid. Reparations were paid, but they were paid to the slave owners. A huge amount of taxpayer money has been, up until about 10 years ago, has basically been paying off the debt that was given that was taken out from the public purse in order to pay off slave owners, in order to allow them to free their slaves. And the people today are still wealthy huge fortunes are still
Okay.
there based off the fact that that slave owners were bought out. So if you can pay back money to the slave owners and say, well, we're taking your property and giving them their freedom, so we're going to give you billions of pounds in today's money.
I get your
Why
point.
can you not?
I get your point. I get both of your points, and we are going to have to go now. Thank you very much, both of you. Femi Nylander there, actor, filmmaker, writer, and the Royal Broadcaster and commentator Rafe Heydel-Mankoo. Both of you, thank you very much. Thoroughly enjoyed that.